What's up, everybody? It is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025, and today it is all about representation. My name is Corey Evans, and I am not a rock star.
My name is Corey Evans, and I am not a rock star. I am a caffeine junkie, licensed minivan operator, touring musician, and a proud American. Ride with me as I tour the greatest country on earth and talk to the real rock stars, our local legends, small town heroes, and those who bravely serve our country. And even though I'm not a rock star, I do live a pretty rock and roll life. This is it. This is America. This is the Not a Rock Star podcast.
Yo, yo, yo. Welcome back to Not a Rock Star with Corey Evans. I am your host, Corey Evans, and we have a very, very special episode lined up today. I am going to be talking to an Illinois State Representative, Mr. Patrick Windhorst. We are going to have a great discussion. Now, before Patrick gets in the van with me, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. First off, let me tell you guys where I am going to be playing this weekend. Tomorrow, Friday, October 3rd, I will be back in my home away from home, Edwardsville, Illinois. I will be playing at the Foundry Public House from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. I love Edwardsville, always a great time. Saturday is going to be jam-packed. I'm going to be playing at the Peach Barn Winery from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. That is in Alto Pass, Illinois. And then I'm going to move on down the road a little bit and play at the Chester Eagles in Chester, Illinois from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. So Saturday, October 4th, Peach Barn Winery in Alto Pass, Illinois, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. and the Chester Eagles in Chester, Illinois from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Now, let me just say a few things before Patrick gets in the van. What we want to do on this podcast, we want to show what makes America great. We know America has flaws. I've been very, very vocal about that. My EP is full of protest, and the album that I'm trying to finish right now is full of protest, but it's also full of what I believe are proclamations about what truly makes this country great. And what makes America great, some of that has to do with the framing of our government. I really think our Constitution is very unique and special, but I also think the American people, that is truly what makes us great. We have some of everybody in this country. We have people from every ethnicity, every part of the globe. And I just think that that is also extremely unique in the scope of history and very special. We want to highlight whom we believe are the real rock stars. So we've been bringing people on from all different occupations and different persuasions, and we hope to continue to branch out and to get an even greater variety of guests. I'm not always going to agree with everything my guests say. In fact, I've had guests on already who may have said some things that I might not see exactly the way they do. But also, that is one of our strengths in this country. It's supposed to be, at least. We're supposed to be able to debate ideas and have open and free discourse. And that's something we really want to defend on this podcast. Now, as far as politics go, I see myself as an American, a proud American. Again, I realize we have problems in this country, but I do believe we can work on those things and we can make things better. I do not think we need to burn the system down. I think we just need to live up to our highest ideals and truly put into practice the principles that were laid out in our founding documents. As far as my political persuasion, I would say I'm an independent. I'm a guy that has some classically liberal ideas, and I'm a guy that has some very conservative traditional ideas. I live my life in a way that would be considered very traditional and conservative. If you kind of look at how I manage my time and my money, and a lot of the values that I still have from my childhood, a lot of those things would be considered conservative. But I am a registered independent, and I want to highlight people from all different parts of the political spectrum on this podcast. We have had in the past two people who are, I guess, in politics, you would say. We've had the mayor of Paducah on, and then we just recently had Stan Diggs on. And Stan is running for the office of sheriff in Williamson County, Illinois. So Patrick today will be our third person to come on who exists in the realm of politics. Again, what we're trying to do is offer free and open discourse. And we just want people to talk. We want to get these ideas out there. We want to bring the level of discourse up. Okay, we're trying to avoid a lot of the name calling and the things that you see on social media. Now, Patrick, I have a lot of respect for him. I'm not just bringing him on because I think he has an interesting story or even that I could learn from him. I have a lot of respect for him, and I've known him basically my entire life. So in addition to wanting to hear his quote side of the story and wanting to learn about what he does as a state representative, he's just someone that I've always thought a lot of, and he's always treated me with a lot of respect. So this is going to be a great discussion today. Make sure you tune in to the end. And with Patrick being an Illinois state representative, there are going to be some very interesting dynamics that he can speak to because Illinois is a state that is extremely varied socially and politically. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Patrick Windhorst. All right. Well, why don't you introduce yourself to the fine people?
Well, thank you. I'm Patrick Windhorst, state representative for the 117th District in Illinois.
Well, we are going to have a tremendous episode today. I have lots of questions for you about state government, about governing in general, and I think a lot of people are curious as to how the sausage is made. So
Definitely.
I'm very excited about this today. We're going to come in hot, and I'm going to ask you a tough question right off the bat. What in the world is wrong with our country right now?
Well, I think our country is as divided as it's been, at least in my lifetime. It seems like the political atmosphere that we have is as divided and as contentious as I can remember. Now, the causes of that are debated endlessly. But I think one of the things is we tend to look at people not as human beings or as fellow humans, but we look at them through the lens of characteristics, like they're Republican or Democrat or black or white or male or female, instead of looking at everyone in their common humanity.
Now, we're going to discuss your entire career, but I do want to ask a few follow-up questions there.
Sure.
What you just described is what people typically would refer to as identity politics. And I can't stand that, like grouping people together and saying every person that fits this description should have this list of like 10 political beliefs that they all share. That's just not how humans are. But when do you remember that becoming more of a pronounced thing? Because I can't remember it being that when I was, say, like 15 years old.
No, I would agree. I would say in the last decade, maybe 15 years, 10 to 15 years, where it became more prevalent for identity politics to play a part in our everyday lives. So I would say maybe between 2010 and 2015, somewhere in that range, and then it has gotten, I think, progressively worse. The pandemic, I don't think, helped situations, not necessarily so much on the identity politics side of things, although that played a part in it, but the fact that we basically all sheltered in our homes and didn't have much human contact for about a year, and keeping kids at home, individuals staying at home, some people not going to church for a while, not going to work. The fact that we lost those human connections, I think, caused it to accelerate even more than what existed before the pandemic. And it seemed like to me last year, 2024, it kind of reached the point where it was the most aggressive as far as that identity politics. I feel like there has been some of it that is kind of diminished in the last year, but there have been things even just obviously recently that show that the divisiveness, at least in our country, is still really there.
And by the time people are seeing this, we will be about 3 to 4 weeks out from Charlie Kirk being assassinated. So I do think that that's kind of worth discussing as well,
Right.
Because that plays into the division that we're talking about. We will circle back to that at some point. Do you think, because I agree with everything you just said, and if I had to put a time period on it, it would be exactly in that window between 2010, 2015. I've heard a lot of people say kind of at the outset of President Obama's second term, maybe that election cycle where he faced Mitt Romney, you started to see more pronounced division. Do you think that social media might be one of the largest agitators? Because around 2012, that's when you started to see the rise of Twitter. That's when, like, for instance, my mom got on Facebook.
Yeah.
I started to see people in my mom's generation get on Facebook. Do you think that might be perhaps even the leading cause of the division?
I feel it played a very strong part. I don't want to say for sure it was the leading cause, but it's got to be among the top 2 or 3 if it's not the leading cause. Again, we lost the ability to see each other as human beings. You look at a person as a profile, or you see them online. In fact, you could have someone that you'd have a conversation like this with, civil, cordial, friendly even, and then online be a completely different discussion, or see a completely different side of that person, perhaps. And then you take, as we talked about with the pandemic, where that became, of course, that was also an election year. 2020 was also an election year where people are just communicating online. And you're seeing only one side of that person. A lot of times it's driven by politics, sometimes religion, but a lot of times politics. So I think that social media, and you can add to that smartphones, the fact that people are online all the time. It's one thing if we just had social media and not the smartphones, because then you're only going to be online really when you're at home and decide to get on your computer. But now people are online all the time, waiting in line, at the post office or the grocery store, work when you have a few down minutes, riding in a car, online all the time. And it skews our understanding what reality is. It presents a false world to us that exists only on the internet.
That is a very good point, and I'm glad you made that addendum, because that's also around the same time you started to see the rise of the smartphone.
Yes.
2012, and that's when I started. I don't really remember when the iPhone came out, but that's when I remember roughly that time, like people I know always needing the newest iPhone, like, oh, the iPhone 3, the iPhone 5, that's a very good point. So clearly all of this affects your day-to-day life, the boiling point, the temperature being turned up, the divisiveness, and we're going to get into all of that today. But I do want to go back to the beginning.
Sure.
We are in Metropolis, Illinois right now. This is our hometown.
Right.
At what point, you grew up here, at what point did you start to think about being interested in politics? Is that something you've always wanted to do, or did that happen maybe after college? How did you get interested in politics?
I've always, as long as I can remember, been interested in politics. Something I followed, even when growing up to an extent, as far as, the elections and what was going on with those. I went to law school because I wanted to basically work to solve people's problems. It's how I viewed what I would do at the law, is to help people with the situations they were facing. And I also found law kind of interesting. And there's often a pretty strong connection between law and government and then law and politics. And one kind of gravitated to the other.
Now, about what age were you when you started to really get interested in law? Was that something you wanted to do in high school?
No, actually, it was later in college. When I was in high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. My childhood dream of being a professional baseball player was long since gone. I realized that wasn't going to happen. So went to college and actually was a journalism major. Was going to be a sports writer, and went to Shawnee College for 2 years. They actually had a journalism scholarship, so I wrote for the student paper there, covered the sports teams, and went on to the University of Illinois to finish up my undergrad. Wrote for the Daily Illini, covered football team, track team, wrestling team, among some others. And it was about that time, between my junior and senior year, that I thought, maybe I need to look in another direction. And mainly what had led me to look somewhere else was I remember getting tickets to go to a sporting event and to cover it, for the newspaper. And I dreaded going. I really don't want to go. So to me, sports was a hobby, something I enjoyed, it was one of my favorite things in life was sports. And I basically realized I don't want to make that my job if it's going to become then something I dread. So I looked at other things and I thought, the law is something I had been interested in. I had taken a media law class where we talked about the First Amendment and how it applied to newspapers and journalists. Did well in the class, liked it, and really enjoyed it. The professor who taught it like a law school class, even though it was an undergraduate class. So decided to apply to law school, got in, went to SIU Law School, and from there, after graduation, practiced law and private practice for a few years, and then became state's attorney of our home county, Massac County.
I'm very curious about law school.
Yes.
I had a friend in college. She went through law school, and I've met people since that are lawyers. And everyone talks about, it's called the LSAT, is that correct?
That's right.
And they talk about just how difficult it is to prepare. And do you only get so many tries to pass that?
Well, it's not a pass-fail. You get a score, and whether your score is good enough to get accepted. So the higher you score, the better you score, the more prestigious of a law school you likely be accepted to.
Oh, I see.
So they take your LSAT score, the law schools take your LSAT score and your undergraduate GPA. Some weight them differently. Some weight the LSAT higher than GPA, some weight GPA more than LSAT. And then you apply to whatever law schools and they'll evaluate the application and accept you. They have changed the LSAT, though, since I took it. And one of the things the LSAT was known for is what's called logic games, where they give you a scenario, and one of the common ones is say, here's a dinner table, there are 8 seats, and give you 8 names, and they say, Jim cannot sit next to Sally, but Sally is 3 seats to the right of George, and you have to figure out where everybody's seated based on that. And of course, it's a time test, so if you had all the time you needed, you could figure it out, but you have to work through those in a time fashion. Well, they got rid of the logic games part, so now it is basically only a reading comprehension test.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask, do you feel like that is lowering the bar, no pun intended, to where, I don't know how else to ask this, but someone with a lower IQ could, in theory, prepare for that test and score highly because it's not really measuring, at least to the same degree, your reasoning power?
Well, I think there was always a question as to how much the LSAT really matched with what a lawyer does. A lawyer's primary job, we look at TV and the movies and even the news to an extent, you think, well, a lawyer's job is basically to be in court, arguing, talking a lot. And most lawyers, and even those lawyers who spend a lot of time in the courtroom, a lot of their job is just reading and writing. They're reading cases, they're reading discovery materials or evidence, and they're writing briefs about it. So reading comprehension is the primary skill for a lawyer. And then being able to craft arguments based on that, what you've read, is of course important. I think there are other people who would say, well, the logic games are important. You need to have somebody who can think logically and quickly and figure all that out. So I see where they're coming from, but I think seeing how someone does through college with their GPA and in coursework, and seeing their ability to have reading comprehension skills is probably going to get us the same quality of lawyers as we have.
And I'm just throwing out numbers here.
Sure.
But that makes complete sense what you said. And from the point of view of a citizen, private citizen, if you told me I had a lawyer that had a 125 IQ, but they played a little loose, and they had a little bit of a maverick streak in them, that might not be as good as someone with, say, a 115 IQ who has a high respect for the law and concerns themselves with always reading and understanding the letter of the law. That person may actually do a far better job for me. So just because the person with the 125 IQ may have a little more natural ability, that's not really determining how well they're going to represent me.
Well, that's exactly right. Most of what, not just being a lawyer, a lot of jobs are this way, professions are this way, but a lot of it is just, do you have the discipline to do the work? When it comes to school, law school, or when it comes to actually practicing law, do you have the self-discipline to do what you need to do to get through school, do well in school, learn in school, and then when you get to work, do you have the self-discipline to continue to represent your clients to the best of your ability?
Now, I made a joke about the bar, but the bar exam, now, is that at the end of law school?
That is. After you, at least in Illinois and Kentucky it is. I believe it's still true in Indiana that you can take the bar exam in your last year before you graduate. But in Kentucky and Illinois, you've got to take it after you graduate. And I say that because I took both the Illinois and Kentucky bar, so that's how I'm aware of that. And had some classmates who took the Indiana bar and were able to take it during our last third year, not senior year, but our third year of law school.
And that is essentially like you have to pass that to become licensed.
That's right.
As an attorney?
It's a pass-fail test. And if you pass it, you can practice law. If you fail it, you can't.
Do you get a limited amount of tries for that?
I don't believe so. No. There may be in some states where that's the case. And I think there are limitations on how often you can take it. And that varies by state.
One more question, then we'll get back into politics.
Sure.
And again, I'm just curious, are there people that are licensed to practice law like anywhere in the United States? Or is it the kind of thing, if you know you're going to be representing someone, say in Nevada, something happened in Las Vegas, that you have to go take Nevada's version of the bar before you can represent a person in the state of Nevada?
Each jurisdiction, which is typically when we say that, we mean each state, sets up their own rules for how a person's licensed to practice in that state. Now, it can be that you don't have to be licensed in a state to represent someone in that state, and you can be get a limited opportunity to practice, maybe for one case or two cases, and that's done on a case-by-case basis. And again, each state's kind of different on how they allow that too. A lot of times it's up to the judge in the case to allow a person in to practice. Sometimes it's up to the Supreme Court to authorize someone to practice for a period of time. But living in Metropolis, right across the river from Paducah, Kentucky, it was not uncommon for people to cross the river one way or the other and not have a license and have to get that special permission to practice.
Now, when you first got into politics, what position did you run for and did you win?
I ran for Massachusetts County State's Attorney in 2004, and I did win and served in that position from 2004 to 2018 when I was elected state representative.
I think that was my first election. And I'm certain I would have voted for you. So that's very
That's good to
interesting.
hear.
Yeah,
Very good to hear. Yeah.
I turned 18 at the end of '03.
Well, that'd
So
be
that
great,
would
yeah.
have been my first.
So that year would have been, does this matter, would have been George W. Bush and John Kerry were running for president. So if that means anything to you or not, I don't know. But
Oh, it does. I wrote a guy in for president, and then about 2 to 4 years later, I'm not going to say his name on camera. He was an actual prominent, like, national political figure, and I want to say that it came out like 30 years after the fact that he had assaulted like a 15 or 16-year-old girl at some point. So I always look back on that election. I was very idealistic, which nothing's really changed. I guess I still am.
yeah,
But at the time, I was like, I don't like either one of these people. They're
Yeah.
not getting my vote. And so there was a guy who was in the South, and he was a very, again, prominent like state figure, but he was nationally known
huh?
and had branded himself as like this very conservative Christian, Constitution and traditional values. I'm like, that guy, that's the guy we need. And so I wrote his name in.
I think I know who you're talking about, and that would be impressive that you would even know who that person was at 18 or 19 years old.
Do both of his names, first and last, have one syllable?
Yes,
And
person
he
I'm
was a
thinking of.
Chief Justice.
That's it. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
okay, you got it.
I'm impressed that at 19 you'd have known who he was.
Yeah. So, like, when that stuff came out later, which I don't even know if they proved anything, it might have just been speculation.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah,
But I'm like, oh no,
yeah.
he got at least one vote for president in 2004, and it was me. Okay, state's attorney.
Yes. Yeah.
What exactly does a state's attorney do? I mean, I don't know how else to phrase that.
Yeah, in Illinois, it's important to kind of define it because state's attorney is not the attorney general. Sometimes people would hear state's attorney if you're not from Illinois, and you think, well, that person is in Springfield or whatever. In fact, when I was running for the job, I knew, of course, a lot of people in Kentucky, and one of them said, well, why do I always see you? Shouldn't you be upstate campaigning for the, and I'm like, no, I'm not running for attorney general, I'm running for state's attorney. So state's attorney is similar to Commonwealth attorney in Kentucky. It is the chief prosecutor of the county in Illinois. And also the state's attorney has the responsibility to represent the county in any civil matters that come inside the county that affect the county government or county elected officials.
So when you say chief prosecutor, like a murder trial,
Murder trial, that's right.
So if somebody within Massac County commits a murder, does the family, do they maybe hire their own representation as well, but you have to be in on the case? How does that work?
It is solely up to the state's attorney whether anyone is prosecuted in the case and who is prosecuted. The family, the victim's family, can hire an attorney essentially to be there for them in court, to be a voice for them in court, but not during the trial, essentially only during some pretrial matters and then at sentencing if the person's convicted. But the case as it appears in court before a jury or a judge at trial is solely within the jurisdiction of the state's attorney.
How long did you hold that position?
I was elected 4 times. It was the middle of my 4th term that I was elected state representative, so 14 years. It's a 4-year term, so it would have been the middle of that 4th term.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. Was there anything in particular that made you want to become a state representative?
A few things. One of the main ones we have seen in Massac County, no other way to put it, a loss in population. People moving out, particularly younger families, some moving right over to Paducah, Kentucky, some moving to Tennessee or other places. And this has been about 2017. Looked around, is this something just happening here, or is this going on other places? And essentially all throughout Southern Illinois, other than the Marion area, basically. Very similar story. People moving out, lost population. A lot of times it is young people graduating high school, going away to college, out of state, and then not coming back. And I looked at it and thought, this is unsustainable. I've always basically lived in Metropolis, essentially my entire life. Want to remain in Metropolis. I want the community to grow and thrive. And I thought I could be the best state's attorney possible, best one in the state, which I wasn't, but if I were, it was not going to change that fact that people are moving out. And looking at things that were going on in Springfield, I thought, well, we need to get up there and make a change. And there were some people with the Republican Party who were involved in looking for candidates, and connection was made with me and them, and decided to make a run for it. Had a primary election in the Republican side, was successful, and then won the general election in November of 2018.
Now, I want to give a disclaimer. I meant to do this at the beginning. Anything that comes out of my mouth today, those are my thoughts, my views, my opinions. Those do not reflect necessarily Representative Windhorst. You know, he can speak for himself. But now we're going to get to the point where I feel like I'm going to have questions and comments that represent a lot of people's views. So I always say I'm from Illitucky. I feel, and Toby is a little different. You know, Toby is very much like Massac first, Metropolis first.
Yeah.
And I feel that way too, but I feel just as strong of a pull to the Paducah side. You know, I just feel like I'm from two states, and I've always kind of thought that, even as a kid. But almost all of my jobs have been in Kentucky. So I've spent, really just kind of straddled the state line and been in both states. But I will say that part of me that identifies as an Illinoisan, and especially someone who's proud to be from Metropolis, proud of Massac County, I don't feel like, and I think a lot of people share this view, we don't feel like a lot of the rest of the state cares about us, or even knows we exist down here. So a lot of us were very happy, even though I was already living in Kentucky when you became a representative. We were very happy. One, because you are a man of integrity, so we were very happy to know that you were going to fill that position. But to know that somebody from Metropolis was going to Springfield to represent us, that was huge. So again, I'm just articulating what a lot of us feel. I mean, you will hear this in casual conversation. If you are in Paducah or Metropolis or really anywhere in southern Illinois, you're going to hear people say, well, Chicago decides everything in Illinois. You know, they don't care about us down here. They think we're all hicks and rubes and rednecks. So I want you to speak to that, because that's going to be one of the main things I know people are going to want me to bring up.
Sure.
Did you feel that way when you were younger? Did you feel like we weren't properly represented? And then have you ran into that in Springfield? Has anyone ever looked down on you because you're from the southern tip of the state? I'm just going to let you speak to that.
Well, to the point of feeling like we're not heard or forgotten about, I think that is common and true, not just in Massac County, not just even in southern Illinois, but a lot of rural Illinois feels that way. Western Illinois, northwestern Illinois, even central Illinois feels like what we want, what our needs are, just not a concern of other places in Illinois, or the urban center, you know, Chicago and the suburbs. And to that, I would say I understand that, and in some ways I share that, and that's why it's important for us as representatives to be vocal about things in Springfield, be vocal about things locally, and to make sure that our voice is being heard in Springfield. And sometimes that's going on not just in the public, not just on the House floor or in the media. Sometimes that's going on behind the scenes, talking with one-on-one conversations with other representatives, elected officials, where we let people know what our needs are and what we think is important. There have been situations where there have been indeed emergencies that have come up in rural parts of the state, even in my district, where things have happened to benefit those places in our district that needed the support of the majority, because which the majority, when I say that, it's typically you're talking about Chicago and the suburbs. That's where the majority of the representation is from. And we were able to get those things done by having our voice heard. But I think that one of the things I've advocated for is more balance in the General Assembly. We have a General Assembly that is 78-40, Democrat to Republican. That's basically 2/3, 1/3, 7%, 33%. But the state itself is more like 55-45 Democrat to Republican. And I think if the representation reflected that 55-45, you would see different policy coming out of Springfield. Wouldn't necessarily be as conservative as I may want, but it wouldn't be as progressive as what we're seeing.
What is the county breakdown? So 55-45 Democrat, but that's basically Chicago and the burbs,
Yes.
and then like some of the suburbs of St. Louis
Yes.
are really making those numbers what they are. But how many counties are in Illinois, and how many of them are red versus blue?
There are 102 counties. What our leader in the House, a Republican leader, says often is our caucus is the only caucus that represents parts of all 102 counties in the state. So based on the way the districts are drawn, we have representation even in the Democratic areas, just how it all works, maybe small portions of those counties. But typically, Cook County and the collar counties, and then you have St. Clair and somewhat Jackson County in southern Illinois, although it doesn't always vote Democratic. Those are the core counties. Sometimes Champaign or McLean County, which is Bloomington, or Sangamon County and Springfield. There are pockets. A lot of times they correspond with where colleges are located, just because younger people and college employees tend to vote Democratic. It depends on the elections, but if you looked at a map, the majority of the counties are going to vote Republican in just about every election.
And we're talking like easily 90% of the counties.
Yes, I mean 80 for sure, but yeah, most times 90, even 95s. And there have been people who have been elected statewide when they won 3 counties: Cook County, another suburban county, and I believe it was St. Clair County. What's the other one?
Now, I will, again, these are my thoughts and feelings. Representative Windhorst is, a Republican representative. I have talked a lot about politics on this podcast. I am registered as an independent in the state of Kentucky. Now, I have certain traditional conservative views. I have certain views that are considered more liberal. But I want people to know I'm making this point right now, not because I'm trying to push you to be Republican or whatever. I'm just trying to articulate the frustration that a lot of folks have, even if they wanted a Democrat to win for a particular position. Because there's times where I personally wanted a Democrat to win something when I lived in Illinois, okay? But the frustration is feeling like a lot of times when you show up to vote, especially in a presidential election, I could write Mickey Mouse on there and the same thing's going to happen. And I feel the same way about Kentucky too. And that's what I tell people. Going back to me voting for that gentleman when I was 19, I have some friends who have gotten on to me later in life for voting third party. And I always say, well, I've always had the luxury of doing that because when I lived in Illinois, I pretty much knew who was going to win. I knew the Democrat was going to win. And now that I'm, on the Kentucky side, I know the Republican's going to win every time. So I'm just making this point to kind of just articulate the frustration that a lot of people around here feel. They feel like their voice isn't heard, or whatever Chicago decides is going to, decide the whole state. But I want to say that's typically like governor or president when people start saying those things.
Right.
I think it's important that we make the point that there's a lot of things that affect our lives outside of a federal election like that. And this is why people need to know what Patrick does, and they need to know about state government, because we can make a lot of difference by being educated about our state representation. So let me just ask about that. What types of things do you think citizens should focus on maybe more than they do about the way the state is ran? And do you think sometimes people get way too wrapped up in national politics and kind of fail to try to make the state better? And let me just kind of ask it that way.
Sure. I think it's absolutely true that the closer the government is to you, the more impact it has on your life. So your city election is going to have the most impact on your day-to-day life. Then maybe the county, then a regional election, then a state election, then a federal election. The federal election is probably going to have, for the most part, the least impact on your day-to-day life. So I think people need to be engaged in politics just generally, need to be aware of what's going on, need to be aware of the issues that are there federal on down. But it's also important to understand that each level of government plays its own role. Local government is supposed to have more impact on the day-to-day lives of the citizens. State would have the next highest impact, and typically is dealing with things that are, at least initially the way the governments were set up, would be more about things regarding the general welfare of the people, such as social programs or criminal justice laws and the court system. And then the federal government was designed for essentially national defense and larger national programs. Of course, after, not to get too much in the history, but after the New Deal and then the Great Society programs in the 60s, that became more about general welfare than what had occurred prior to that. But the point I'm trying to make is that each level has its own role, and the closer the government is to you, the more impact it should have on your everyday life. So with that being said, people need to be informed about what's going on, particularly starting what's going on in their local communities or cities and counties, and then from the state. And I view a lot of what we do as state representatives, in addition to voting on laws, which is the primary goal of a representative, to let the wishes of the people be known through our votes, in my case in Springfield. But then it's also to provide assistance to our local governments as they work with the state government, and then our local constituents as they have issues with state government and state agencies, to make sure that the processes that have been put in place are working the way they're supposed to work for people. And that if somebody's having an issue with their unemployment or having an issue with getting their FOID card, we help them get those things done and make sure the state works in the way it's supposed to.
And I think what you said about whom has the biggest impact on your personal life is very important. A lot of people associate even that mindset with conservatism. And so this is going to be one of those areas where I am more conservative, because I do believe people need to be very, very educated about local government, and you can make the biggest impact in your own community by the local government. And then you start looking to state politics and then federal elections. So I hold that belief. Obviously, we can think of exceptions. Like during World War II, people might have rather have had FDR than, the Republican person for whatever reason. There are like extreme cases where in the countries at war, you really want to think about who you're electing to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Yeah. There's obviously, slavery is another big one people always bring up. Well, clearly that was a case for the federal government. But generally speaking, you need to be very focused on what's going on around you. So I hold that belief too. And again, that's something people typically associate more with conservatism. So that would be one of my belief sets that would be labeled conservative. I did ask this kind of in the midst of asking a whole bunch of things, but do people ever give you friction in like state government, I'll ask two things here.
Sure.
One, because you're literally from as far south as you can go in the state, is there kind of a mindset that people might have in northern parts of the state where they look down on us? Do you ever run into that? And then because there is a majority Democrat, do you ever get kind of some friction because you're in the minority party?
So to the first one, not that I've noticed, other than occasionally you talk about that Illitucky, I think, was that the phrase used? People have said to me before, in joking, and actually these were Republican members who are also from not southernmost Illinois, but rural areas, who say I'm actually represented from northern Kentucky rather than southern Illinois because we're right here, you know. If there is any looking down on us in southern Illinois or the rural areas, it's not said directly. Now, we point out there are times when the needs of the rural areas are not considered as opposed to the needs of a more urban area. You know, one of the things that one of the examples I point to, a representative from Chicago was pointing out that a hospital in her district was going to close, and now individuals were going to have to drive, instead of 5 minutes to the hospital, they were going to have to drive 15 minutes to the hospital. And this was terrible and would have negative health impact on her constituents. And don't dispute that. Having to go that additional way for healthcare was going to be a negative impact. But it's routine for people in our area to have to drive 15 minutes to a hospital or more, potentially in some of the, well, in all of our district, but particularly those that aren't bordering, you know, either Cape or Paducah. So there is a disconnect about the issues that we see in urban areas versus rural areas and what the needs are. Another time that comes up is firearms. You know, a lot of people in Southern Illinois own firearms, just part of their everyday life, part of our everyday life. And but in other parts of the state, that's viewed as an anomaly, that few people would own firearms. And so that leads to a skewing of public policy where things are passed with a certain group of people in mind that is different than the entire group of people it's going to affect.
But guns, that is a huge thing. I see that really half the way up the state. You'll see a lot of like 2A signs.
Yes.
And I want to make that point too, because around here, you know, if you're in Tennessee, which we're like 50 something miles from Tennessee right now, well, those people will be like, well, once you get into Kentucky, you start encountering the Yankees. You know, you'll hear that. And then people in Paducah are like, oh, don't cross the river. Don't cross the river for anything. And then like here, we were always told like, hey, things are good around here, but don't go farther north. You know, there's no reason to go north. We would always hear that. So I always say everybody in the South hates somebody, and all the different levels of the South have a concept of like who a Yankee is, basically.
Right.
But I want to make the point for our listeners who are from this area or Kentucky. I can tell you the cultural values that we have around here exist almost everywhere I go in Illinois. I mean, I play up around Champaign, and it's no different than Western Kentucky. You just don't hear accents. That's it. Same values. You have a lot of sportsmen, you know, people that have guns because of deer season, that type of thing. So I just wanted to make that point too, that I like how you keep saying the rural areas. Because again, I think people down here maybe have a false conception that if you just go north, then people are, quote, more liberal. When in reality, most of the state of Illinois is kind of falling under the same cultural value umbrella. And it's just more of basically, again, kind of like Chicago is different. So let me ask this now. How much do national politics affect state governance? Do you find that the two parties have a hard time working together in the state house because now things are so contentious in general? Is there a lot of gridlock in the House of Representatives? Do Republicans typically vote Republican and Democrats, is it the kind of thing where like the Republican representatives are voting 98% of the time with their party? I mean, is it a lot like national politics?
There are a lot of similarities. And you'd asked me a question I just want to come back to about do people look down on us from where we're from as far as representatives are concerned? And then you said based on party affiliation, do Democrats look down on Republicans? I don't know that they look down on us, but what has been more common over the last few years is they have started to exclude us. So, and by that I mean when a conversation is going on about a certain bill or the budget, they just don't even involve us in the conversation and make that decision on their own. One of the clearest ways to point out this is that our speaker has a rule that says that, well, let me back up. For a bill to pass, it needs 60 votes. There's 118 members, it needs 60 votes. No matter how many are present, that number is always 60. So if only 100 people show up, you still need 60 votes to pass it. The Speaker of the House has a rule that says that in order for a bill to be called for a vote on the floor, you have to have 60, he has to be presented with a list of 60 Democrats who are going to vote yes. So that means that the Democratic members have no reason or incentive to talk to anybody on our side of the aisle, even though we're 40 members.
Because they have 78, correct?
Because they have 78. So, and getting a Republican member to say they vote yes on your bill does not do anything to get your bill called on the floor for a vote.
How can you get anything passed unless it's just the most base level, everybody can get behind this kind of thing? I mean, how do you ever get anything passed?
Well, it tends to be more progressive than it's been even when I started in 2019, although I think that's when we started to see a move to the left from the state. Illinois had been, to use red and blue, had been a blue state for a little while, but had still been somewhat more moderate in its governance. And then since the election of 2018, we've seen a strong move to the left. What's interesting, you look at the other side of the aisle, the Democratic caucus, they have a lot of sub-caucuses within that caucus. So they have a progressive caucus, they have a moderate caucus, they have a Latino caucus, a black caucus, an Asian caucus. There are probably others that not listed. And all these sub-caucuses of the Democratic caucus will meet and decide what they're going to support, and then they'll go to another caucus. And some of them have enough members, you mentioned 78 and they need 60, some have enough members, 19, where they could say, we're all against it, so this bill isn't going to move forward.
Whoa.
So what then you see is, instead of consensus building among all 118, there has to only be consensus building among the 78. And again, that's why you have a state that is just roughly 55-45 Democrat to Republican, but the representation is 2/3, 1/3. If the representation were 55-45, then by the very nature of the numbers, they would have to talk to both sides in order to get a bill passed. And you would see more moderate policies that represent the state as a whole. And you'd see more working together across the aisle.
Do you see other things like, okay, here was one that was kind of recent. In 2020, the death of George Floyd, you started to see a lot of people feel the need to either become, quote, pro-cop or pro-Black Lives Matter. Whereas, like, I would look at that and say, shouldn't it be everybody against bad policing, everyone for good policing, everyone for equality for everybody? But that's not the way it was framed. It became cops versus black people, basically. Have you seen that particular issue, the nature of that change in the State House?
To an extent. In Illinois, we were one of the leading states in that issue, even though the incident with George Floyd was not in Illinois. We passed in 2021, in January of 2021, what was called the Safety Act, which was a large overhaul of the criminal justice system in Illinois. Also dealt with police certification, to your point about whether individuals should be police officers or not. But one of the biggest things, the most notable things it did, was it eliminated cash bail in Illinois and made essentially an in or out system. Whereas when someone's arrested for certain offenses, they can be held prior to trial, and others cannot be held prior to trial, have to be immediately released, or in some cases not even arrested. And that law has really impacted the criminal justice policy in our state since that time, as much as the conversations around George Floyd. Of course, that came right after George Floyd, and we saw after the bill passed, I think we had 4 what we call trailer bills, but essentially 4 bills that came up later that in different years that were designed to modify the original Safety Act to reform it in a way to essentially clean it up. So the issues around criminal justice and race are very prevalent in our state house, and of course I mentioned with our sub caucuses around race. Right, there's a Black caucus, Latino caucus, Asian caucus. So those issues are part of the conversation. They're issues related to what, as a shorthand, referred to as DEI. That's often parts of the debate, and see efforts to enshrine DEI into state law with some changes in federal law. But one thing though, on the criminal justice side, we have in the last year or so not seen as many major changes, I think because there's an effort to see how far the Safety Act is going to go as far as whether it's going to have a dramatic impact on public safety or not.
And we had Stan Diggs on a few weeks ago, and he made the point that nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop. And I have a cousin who is a police officer in Houston, Texas, and she says the same thing. But that issue, kind of like the transgender issue, it's not that I don't believe there are things that we should be thinking about, ways we should be trying to make people's lives better. To me, it's obvious that there are certain areas of this country where there's a lot of disparity that affects African Americans more, like East St. Louis or Detroit, Michigan. So like these are conversations that have to be had. We have to try to make people's lives better in the inner city. We do need to take a long, hard look at policing. My frustration is always on the federal level. I feel like the politicians take these real concerns that citizens have, especially social issues, and then they exploit those things and try to get votes by focusing on these really heated social issues. But the majority of the politicians on the federal level are kind of bought off by the same companies. That's always my frustration. And so I was just curious, the reason I'm asking about how much of this comes up in the State House is I'm wondering how many politicians will grandstand, dig their heels in on a particular social issue on one side or the other, but they're doing that because they're trying to align themselves with their party nationally so they can get votes on a state level. I mean, do you feel like that type of thing has escalated? And I know you can't name names, that would be unprofessional, but do you feel like some of your colleagues have fallen into that trap where they're really digging their heels in, and it could be a Republican or a Democrat, but they're doing that for branding purposes, maybe more so than governing purposes?
A couple thoughts on that point. One is, and I'm not the person who came up with this, but it's been pointed out that now people who are in elected office look at the office not as something that they're going to serve in or is going to mold them in some way, or they're going to be part of an institution like a member of Congress or a member of the General Assembly, but they view it as a platform by which they build their brand. So they become almost like a celebrity in a way. And when that happens, then instead of having a focus of serving the people, the focus is on serving self. So I think grandstanding has always been in politics since we've had elected offices. There's been an element of grandstanding, an element of wanting to get attention for the purpose of getting votes to get elected. I think one of the bigger things that has changed, even in my lifetime, is the fact that the primary election, by primary I mean the political election for, typically in Illinois, is in the spring for Republican or Democrat, what we call the primary, is the election for most representatives. If you win your primary, you're not going to have much opposition in the fall, because for most districts, we have become so polarized and divided even geographically, that one party is prevalent in rural areas, another party is prevalent in urban areas. So winning that primary ensures your election in the fall. So if that's the case, which I mean it is by the numbers, then if your primary is your most important election, you're going to be worried about appealing more to your primary voter than to maybe a broader section of the constituency or the district. So that tends to then, a cynic would say, reward grandstanding, because if you get attention within your party by grandstanding, then that allows you to build yourself up within the party and then not have that issue in the primary, and then be able to ensure your election then for another term. Now, I would say that we've kind of alluded, I'm conservative. The district I represent is conservative. For me, it's not so much, I don't view my job as one to grandstand. I view it as I'm expressing to other representatives, to other elected officials, the governor, what the views are of my communities that I represent. And that's an important function of the job. And it's been said, when you're in the majority party, you have to legislate. When you're in the minority party, your job is to communicate what your values are, what your policies would be. That way you can attempt to win seats at the next election to maybe become the majority, so you can then put into place your policy through legislation. So it's important for us who represent the rural areas in Southern Illinois to make sure that we're communicating what our values are. And I think it's important for our constituents to know that even though the policy may not be, the direction may not be what the way they want it to go, there are people in Springfield who are expressing their views broadly to the other representatives.
Do you feel any pressure to be, quote, more MAGA? Because what you just said about the primaries, that is very eye-opening. So in this area, largely conservative, if somebody came along and they were more boisterous and took more of a, very much aligning themselves with the, quote, MAGA movement, that could pose a problem for you, because that could be more demonstrative, more of a, rock star, they got slogans and build the wall,
Yeah.
Is that like an issue? And I'm going to throw out kind of a silly example, but, the president saying, well, we're going to call it the Gulf of America from now on. Somebody could come up and be like, Representative Windhorst, what do you think about that? I mean, do you want it to be the Gulf of Mexico still? Or how do you feel about the Gulf of America? I mean, have you experienced pressure to align yourself more with that versus just your conservative principles?
I would say that issue is one that we would see when a person's first elected. When you're first elected, the voters, they just know what you're putting forward, what your statements are. But after you're elected, you have a record. So I have 500 votes a year I take about. So over 8 years, you're talking about 4,000 votes that, you just say, if you want to know how I feel about something, there's going to be a vote probably around that issue where that'll tell you. And you know what you're getting from me based on my voting record. This is who I am. It's not just a slogan. It's not just a speech. There's a record to back it up. And that's why, just kind of as an aside, if you have someone who is doing a good job as an elected official, that has a record, it's hard to beat them in an election because they have a record that supports what they're putting forward, so long as both the record and what they're putting forward matches what the voters want. As far as any pressures, I try to be my own person, express my views, that way people know how I feel. A lot of it, what happens in politics now, I think you have somewhat alluded to it, can be just noise. It's not impacting people's daily lives. It's not making their lives better or worse. It's just noise. It's a cultural point where it's almost like you're taking sides, one team versus another team. And that can lead to some of the polarization we talked about at the very beginning, where we lose sight of what the ultimate goal is of public policy, and that's to improve the community, the region, the state that you're living in, versus just talking about things that are always contentious.
And I would hope everyone would vote on the basis of what you just said. If someone is already in office, look at their record, because they can say anything when they're out campaigning, but look at what they're actually supporting. And then if someone has never been in office, or maybe they're not in the office that they're running for, demand for them to actually talk about policy and not just these like hot button slogans. But I thought that's brilliant. Like what you just said, that is brilliant. Your record speaks for itself. And I wish every politician would function that way when they're relating to the public. And I wish the public would vote on that basis versus team red or team blue, basically. We mentioned Charlie Kirk at the top of this discussion. That is terrifying. And that is now maybe the 7th or 8th case, like high profile case of political violence that I can think of in the last 3 or 4 years. There was Paul Pelosi, I think, got hit over the head with a hammer. There was a senator that got murdered in June?
Minnesota Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House, okay. Yeah. So, and we could keep going. I mean, there's a lot of these types of cases. There was the softball game in the Washington, D.C. area where several federal people came under fire, federal representatives, senators. What was that, maybe 6 years ago, something like that?
I think it was 2017, but it's...
Okay, so 8 years ago.
Been within the last decade.
And we're starting to see these types of things happen more frequently. Now, Charlie is probably the most high profile, and unfortunately, like everything, that's become divisive.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of people on the right that are like, he's our generation's MLK, and then you see people on the left, he's a Nazi, he's a homophobe. And I don't know why people can't just be sensible, first of all. And then second of all, a guy got shot in front of his family, and everybody's seen it. It's awful. It's terrible. So that's not the way to handle things. But anyways, do you, one, have fear for your own safety? You had told me off camera that this is parade season, and you have recently just been heckled simply for the fact that you're conservative. So in light of what's been going on in our country, do you feel maybe a little more like concern about your own safety? And then do you have a concern in general for public discourse? Do you feel like it's now harder to have civil conversations because the temperature has been turned up?
Well, as far as the public safety, or my own safety, I should say, the prior job I had as state's attorney, it was not uncommon. I wouldn't say routine or even common, but not uncommon for me to get a death threat. That just would happen. And it happens now as even state representative. That happens I don't know that happens as much as when I was state's attorney, but it does happen. And so it's not something I try to dwell on or really think much about. More concerned about making sure my family's safe, and if someone has an issue with me, that they need to address it with me and not with the family, and of course address it in a civil way and a respectful way. I do feel like there has been a change in the way acceptable political conversation occurs. It used to be that some of these things that we see more that are common now were not as common and would be rare. You mentioned the heckling. I've been in parades for 20 years, and more recently, since it became state representative, parades around the region. Up until this year, had never experienced being heckled, which people just yelling out about policy or about political positions. It wasn't necessarily offensive or insulting, but just unusual. And of course, you want to make sure what's going on here. What is this person about when they're yelling out at you? But I use that as to illustrate that I think that illustrates a change in people's attitude and opinion about how they're going to interact with, elected officials. A state representative is one of the few elected officials that can have still can be at a state level, but also still have personal contact with constituents on a pretty broad level. So I be in parades throughout my district. Basically, anybody who wants to meet with me can meet with me. So we know a lot of our constituents, a large percentage of our constituents. So that's why I feel like people shouting out like that is a little unusual, because if a person has an issue with me, a lot of times they can just take it up with me rather than having to make a spectacle of it.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying, and I'll let you go ahead because I was just going to add to that. But
well, I was going to say, I would like to see people not associate what the top of a party is doing on a federal level with you on either side. So, like, if people get mad at President Trump over his meeting with President Zelensky, don't take that out on Patrick. That has nothing to do with him. And the same thing on the other side of the aisle. If people are angry about the Democrats covering up the fact that Joe Biden, quite frankly, was half dead, that has nothing to do with some Democratic state representative. But I feel like that you might be getting some of that residual animosity. Like, they're holding you personally accountable for what they're seeing on a federal level.
Well, we'll just say the Republican side of things. What I see is, President Trump is not going to come and march in a parade in Southern Illinois where these individuals can yell and heckle at him. So, I view that as the next best thing. They can't yell at him personally, so they can yell at me personally. And a lot of times to the issues, there's confusion that one of them had to do with the one big beautiful bill that the person heckled about. Of course, I'm not a federal or not a congressman, so I didn't vote on that bill. And not that my vote would have been different than our congressman, but I, as a prominent Republican politician, or a stand-in for the whole party, same way a prominent Democratic politician would be a stand-in for their party. Back to the discourse, I feel like it's gotten worse. Part of it is politicians are rewarded now for name-calling. I mean, I don't want to really give examples because you could probably give them on both sides. But that is not only accepted, I think encouraged. And I think, we talk about things that are constitutional or legal, and then you get into things, well, it's maybe constitutional or legal, but is it ethical, or is that a norm in our politics? And it used to be not a norm where you would be personally insulting to people. But that is now a norm that has been removed, that you could be personally insulting to someone and not have a consequence, or at least political consequence, for that activity. And that applies on both sides of the aisle. And that is a large change, and it leads to an element of just making politics uglier than what it had been, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Now, there's always been name calling to an extent. Sometimes it was just saying, well, that person's a liberal, or that person's a conservative or reactionary, but now we're going so far as to say, well, that person's a Nazi, or that person's a communist. If they, although there are people that will hold to those principles, but there's times when those terms are used when it's not an accurate description of who they are. And it's used just to score political points. Doesn't get you to the end result about what the right policy position is or what's best for a community or a state. It just, a lot of times, is designed to score political points.
So please, if you're hearing this or watching this, as we've said before, a lot of good and a lot of change is going to come from your local and state government. But if you're relating to your local and state officials as if they're personally responsible for everything that their party decides on a federal level, you're making it harder on your representatives to do their job. So let's try to use some civility. Also, I will say too, if you want to know how far the discourse has fallen, go back and watch presidential debates from the 80s or early 90s. They're on YouTube, so you can watch Ronald Reagan debate Walter Mondale. Just watch their debates from 1984 and see how they, shake each other's hand or joke around, and then watch, President Trump versus President Biden. And you can see how the discourse is fallen.
We talk about civility in politics, and particularly elected officials, and how the language has changed. People are not as civil in the way they talk about each other. One of the good things about our system is we are ultimately governed by the people. We the people. And if the people want to change the system, they want to change the way their elected officials are behaving, they have that power through the ballot box. I guess, maybe the problem comes in if you have only two candidates who are each acting that way. What is your real choice? And for a lot of voters, civility isn't as important as making sure that there's public safety or the cost of living is kept low or other issues that are more personal or day-to-day. But that is the good thing about our system, is ultimately the people get to decide the direction of the country through their votes.
And you had mentioned off camera too that the tactics that we've kind of been discussing, like the grandstanding or the name calling, unfortunately, people respond to that. So it is almost like a chicken and the egg type thing. We want to blame the top politicians for behaving that way, but then if it's moving the needle, it is also our fault for responding to that. And if we demanded more and better, they wouldn't be able to use those tactics. And you had mentioned that to me earlier today,
right.
And I just feel like that's also brilliant.
Well, and that's right. The name calling, and a kind of an extension of that, may be just negative campaigning, is focusing on the personal or attacking another person for something that has nothing to do with policy, has been shown to move the needle electorally, result in a favorable election outcome. So that's, when that happens, you're going to see more of it. That's viewed as a success, so that success is going to lead to more efforts along that line. It's difficult because we are governed by the people. The people are in charge, but also the people have lives they have to live where they can't be tuned in or dialed into everything that's occurring on the national stage, the state level, or even the local level. So then we kind of come back to, there needs to be leadership where our governor, our president, our state representatives, elected officials demonstrate the ability to be leaders and avoid that conduct.
I think this is a perfect segue. Going back to the Charlie Kirk situation, this is a perfect segue to something Toby wanted me to bring up. He wanted us to talk a little bit about freedom of speech, and he wanted you to speak to how, yes, we have freedom of speech, or we're supposed to anyways, but there are consequences, especially in a professional sense, when you put things out online. And so we're seeing that right now with people's different responses to the murder of Charlie Kirk. Some people are getting fired. I realize this is kind of open-ended, and I'm not
Sure.
even really asking you a particular question, but can you speak to that? Yes, we have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom from consequences due to your speech. So do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, that line you just said is exactly it. We have the freedom of speech, but not the freedom from consequences of speech. Now, we use the term freedom of speech just broadly. That comes from the First Amendment of the Constitution, and that is a legal principle that really applies to the government. The government, in fact, the First Amendment says the Congress shall make no law, and blah blah blah, abridging the freedom of speech. That limits the government's ability to punish us for our speech. There are times when you can be punished for speech. It's very limited. For the most part, the government cannot punish for speech. But that does not mean, and also the government cannot, for the most part, have employment consequences if you're employed by the government for your speech. There are some other exceptions there that apply. We're just talking generally. But that does not mean a private employer has to give their employees the freedom to just say whatever they want and not suffer an employment consequence potentially for that speech. Each employer is free to take a different position on that. It doesn't mean because we have the freedom of speech that somebody's not going to have a negative attitude toward you because of an opinion you've expressed. That's kind of one of the risks of expressing yourself, is that there's going to be people who don't like your expression. But ultimately, we believe that that freedom of expression or the free exchange of ideas is going to lead to a better society, ultimately a better government, that those freedoms produce a better result. So long as we're sharing ideas, sharing thoughts, hopefully in a civil and respectful manner, that will result in us having a better, stronger country, and all the way down the levels of government. And if it's done right, then it will lead to mutual respect, mutual understanding, maybe get away from the contentious nature of our politics, where we just see somebody's position on a certain issue or someone's support of a certain party, and we automatically have a negative thought about them. I mean, that's going back to Charlie Kirk. That's what he was trying to do with his Prove Me Wrong college tours, is allow people to engage him and he engaged them on different controversial issues or issues of the day, both political and religious. And that was a real positive. And I think that's why his assassination has had such an impact, is that this was somebody who was engaged in nothing more than exchanging ideas. They were controversial thoughts in a lot of ways, that not everybody agreed with them, of course. They were controversial. But he was allowing people to speak. And you could ask him a question, he would answer it. He would ask you questions, you could answer or not if you wanted to. It was on you. That is the free exchange of ideas. And to think that somebody would be shot just for engaging in that. He wasn't someone in elected office where he was passing legislation or enacting policy that impacted people's lives. He was just expressing himself and allowing others to express themselves. I think that's why we've seen the impact that his death has had, because it's something fundamental to what we think about as America and what our country is about.
Do you think, as a rule of thumb in a general sense, that we defeat bad speech with good speech, and we defeat bad ideas with additional speech, versus trying to silence people that have bad ideas?
I agree with that concept, that we defeat bad speech with good speech, we defeat bad ideas with good ideas, and allowing more ideas to be out in society. Ultimately, my view is the truth wins.
I feel the same way.
The truth wins, whether it's on a political issue or fundamental matters of faith. The truth wins, and you can maybe push down the truth for a time or a season, but ultimately the truth is going to win.
And you had alluded to, there are certain forms of speech that don't fall under the umbrella of free speech, like if I'm inciting a riot.
Correct.
Now, a lot of people give the example, you can't yell fire in a movie theater unless there really is a fire. I don't even know if that's true. But the point is, you can't do and say things that directly affect people's physical well-being. You
Right.
can't be like, there's that guy, go get him, let's go shoot him. Or, you can't say things like that. That's not protected under free speech. But what Charlie was doing absolutely falls under the umbrella of freedom of
Oh, yeah.
speech. And so, yeah, it's very disturbing. And then, unfortunately, I mean, a lot of us are not used to seeing someone die like that. And it's awful that that footage exists everywhere. I didn't even try to find it and saw it.
Yeah, the same.
It's
And
terrible.
It tremendously impacting. It was horrible. Just terrible.
Now we're going to shift gears.
Sure.
Just have a few more questions. You recently, I think it was earlier this year, made a public response to something the governor of the state had said about Republicans. Do you want to talk about that incident, and do you want to talk about your response to what he said?
Sure. The governor, who we've alluded to, is looking at potentially running for president, is campaigning outside of Illinois, giving speeches around the country, talking about issues. And, I think he views, don't want to obviously speak for him, can't, but he views himself as being the leading charge against President Trump. And part of that is using rhetoric that I think it crosses the line. And one of the things he said, there was actually a few incidences. One occurred in the House chamber. He was giving his State of the State address, and he, toward the end of his speech, basically compared the president and, by extension, Republicans to Nazis. He made comparisons to Nazi Germany and the fall of the Republic, and alluding to current political situation. That was in February. Later in the spring, he gave a speech in which he talked about how Democrats need to stand up, need to, paraphrasing, stand up against Republicans, fight against Republicans. And he said these Republicans should not know a moment of peace. That was interpreted by many on our side as a call for, if not outright violence, at least physical confrontation with elected officials, which is the opposite of having civil discourse or reasoned debate. It's intimidation.
It's harassment.
Right, harassment and intimidation. Yeah. It's designed to force people to change based on their fear of their physical safety. And the rhetoric has continued to be at a high level, high-pitched, not high level in a positive way, but more high-pitched, and just to the point of almost where you're just at the line of calling for violence. You're calling for everything short of it. And it's dangerous. And the point of the statement that I made was that the governor needs to pull back from that, and actually, not just him, but all elected officials need to demonstrate leadership. You can make your positions known. You can point out differences in an aggressive way, even without saying we need to intimidate people and harass people. And basically, by saying that, you're saying our ideas have lost in the exchange of ideas, and the only way we're going to win is to intimidate people into complying with what we want. And that's the opposite of what our society is and our country under the Constitution is designed to be.
It also seems, and I get his logic, I don't agree with it. I get where he's coming from. I, again, do not agree with it. But if he is upset about, quote, MAGA, what does that have to do with you showing up to Springfield to vote on an appropriation of funds for public schools or something? Like, which Republicans is he referring to? And to me, that's very irresponsible as the leader of the state. He is the executive of the entire state, because he needs to be working with the Republican lawmakers to make common sense things happen for his citizens. So when you say stuff like that, he might have had in mind Donald Trump. He might have had in mind, people on Trump's staff or Republicans that he doesn't agree with at the top levels of the state, but he's just making life harder for the lawmakers all throughout his state. And he's making it harder to have good civil discussions and to come up with common sense solutions for people that live in Illinois. So like, that's my biggest objection with that, is he's shooting himself in the foot.
Well, I'm going to speculate a little bit, so just that's clear. The statements he made in the State of the State address, of course, we're in Springfield. They were designed to be picked up nationally. The statements he made in the spring, I believe those were in California, obviously outside the state of Illinois, designed to be picked up nationally. They were in service to his desire to run for federal office, to elevate his national profile. Kind of what we talked about earlier about, are people using their positions to do good, to enact good public policy, to move policy progress in the direction they want, or are they using it as a platform by which they are going to build their brand? And it seems pretty clear that the governor right now is trying to build his brand to run for president in 2028.
I got frustrated with my governor. I actually like the guy. I hope this doesn't anger people, but I voted for Andy Beshear. He's a Democrat. I always say I'm 60-40 on Andy, which is that's about as high I can get it on any politician, unless I literally know them personally, like this. But I generally like Andy. I think he's doing a pretty good job. I think he works with the Republicans in the state and, whatever. But I started seeing him say things, nothing that extreme. But during this last election cycle, I'm like, oh man, Andy is jockeying for position, because he also has his eye on national politics. And I'm afraid that everything I like about Andy is going to be jeopardized when he has something to gain on a federal level. And I feel that way about Republicans too. There are Republicans who've really let me down. Tulsi Gabbard has said some things I don't like, and I always supported her, and I'm a little frustrated with her right now. And again, these are my opinions, not Patrick's, but I just don't like that in general. When I see politicians get their eye on a bigger prize, and then all of a sudden the principles start to go out the window. I hate that. It's the antithesis of everything we're trying to promote on this podcast. But yeah, that was a high profile thing. A lot of folks around here were very proud of you for standing up and saying, wait a minute, that's not what we stand for, or that's not what we want. We were proud of you for being a person of integrity, but we also, folks at this end of the state and even Western Kentucky felt very proud that you're representing us. So I just want to let you know that.
Appreciate that.
This is just kind of a fun one. Road construction in Illinois. What in the world? I came from St. Louis last night and had to be back in Paducah early this morning. And I feel like 2/3 of my drive was either one lane or a, quote, construction zone. Who should we be mad at? What's going on?
Well, the old line is, in Illinois we have two seasons, winter and road construction. That's the two seasons that exist in Illinois. The way road construction in Illinois is funded is primarily through our gas tax. The gas tax was increased with the budget of 2019, and I voted against that gas tax increase just for clarity's sake. But that money that's collected through the gas tax is placed into a lockbox that can only be spent for transportation-related issues, primarily road construction. And what we're seeing now is a list of projects that are being done that have been either on hold or had not been done in a timely way. So we're seeing a lot of road construction because the money has been generated through the gas tax to fund those projects. Those projects are essentially designed and implemented by IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation. And I'm right there with you. Whenever I drive anywhere, going to Paducah, of course, with the bridge construction, going north, there is road construction on almost every mile of interstate in some form or capacity. The only good thing is we know the roads are being worked on. Hopefully this will be a short-term pain for long-term benefit.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, when they do actually finish a stretch of the interstate, it is nice.
Yeah.
But
And it does, sometimes with, say, the state highways, Highway 45 or that's US 45, but the state maintains it, or Illinois 145. Sometimes they do those on county by county stretches. So one year they may work on Johnson County's part of 45, let's say, and then the next year or a couple years later they work on Massac County's portion. So it makes it feel like, well, they're always working on this road, but they're really doing it in segments or sections.
I can live with that.
Yeah.
I just think my frustration, and probably a lot of people's, is a pretty common trip would be like from Paducah to St. Louis.
Yeah.
I mean, I make that trip all the time because I play up there a lot.
Right.
But man, when 2/3 of that is in a construction zone, and I think I had a 40-minute stretch where I was in one lane.
Yeah.
I think there was an interchange at Mount Vernon
Yes.
where there was maybe 2 or 3 lanes for like a mile and a half, and then it went right back to one lane. And I had been in a one lane thing for about 20 to 25 miles.
That's right.
And this won't mean a lot to the listeners, but the Evitses especially just don't do well with that. They have what they call an Evitz foot, and we tend to be aggressive people, and that was driving me nuts. It does every time I go up there. Okay, 2 more questions.
Sure.
What are you looking forward to the most? And it doesn't even have to be political. It could be in your personal life, but
Sure.
What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I enjoy this time of year. There's a lot of going on. We mentioned the carnivals and parades and fairs that are going on this time of year, which I enjoy, getting out to meet the people. But we're in a stretch of time now where we're in district working more than in Springfield working. So that means I get to spend more time with family, which is something that basically combines the best part of my job, which is getting to meet and be around people, with being able to be around my family, which not being around family is the worst part of the job, having to be away as much, particularly in the winter and spring. So I'm looking forward to this fall, more time with family and getting to enjoy that.
And my final question, what would you like to leave the listeners with? What would you like them maybe to know about you or your vision for Illinois?
Well, we have focused a lot on the divisions of the country and the divisions of the state. I would say that there is more that unites us than divides us. It's a trite saying, people say it, but it is still true. If you look at what are the issues that divide us, not trying to minimize them, they are important issues, but there are fundamental things we still agree on, and we have to remain united around those things and continue to remind ourselves about the things that unite us. And a lot of this is going to be less focused on what's said online and more focused on interacting with people face to face, getting to know people, just being a better neighbor, better community member. And I do believe that a lot of people, I think maybe fashionable now to suggest that maybe the United States is on the decline. I don't believe that. I believe that our better days are ahead of us. We've got challenges, of course, for sure. We have challenges in the state, definitely, that we need to overcome. But with the right vision, with the right policies, things will get better and can get better, and there are brighter days ahead.
That is a tremendous way for us to end this discussion. And I couldn't agree more. I think we have so much more in common than we realize. And when we actually have discussions face to face, we learn that. When you hide behind your thumbs or a keyboard, it's a little harder to realize that. But what makes us great, what makes this country great, it's the people, it's us. And I just want to say thank you to you for being a true rock star. I have known you pretty much my entire life. Your brother was our first guest. Your brother Parker was the first guest of this podcast, and I've known your family for as long as I can remember, and you guys have always been extremely kind people. Your parents were amazing. Your dad was like the principal at the high school or assistant principal when I was in high school, and I really looked up to him. I remember when he had to go overseas. After 9/11, he had to go serve overseas for a while, and I'll never forget that. Like, man, Mr. Windhorst, he has to go, but he did. And he served our country with pride and bravery. And you have always been just a person I look up to. I know you're a man of integrity. I am proud to say I know you personally. And one of the only things that I really, really miss, not necessarily about Metropolis, but just about, quote, living in Illinois, is I can't vote for you. So I hate that.
We need to work on that.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to work on getting you to move back more than any other thing.
Yeah. But, you know, I'm always traveling now, and then I do live in an arts district in Paducah, which is great for a musician.
Oh, yeah.
You know, obviously I miss seeing the folks I lived by in Metropolis and that kind of thing. But yeah, every time I see you running for something, I'm like, I can't vote for Patrick anymore. But I can't thank you enough for what you do. We could not have a free society if it wasn't for our representatives. And I truly believe that you are serving and you have the right motivation. So just thank you for everything you are as a human being, but also thank you for your service to our state and to our country.
Thank you for having me on. This has been a tremendous honor for me to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Mr. Representative.
Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, I want to thank my guest today, Mr. Patrick Windhorst. Mr. Representative, we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to teach us about the ins and outs of Illinois politics, but also how what is going on a national level is trickling down and affecting state and even local politics. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you. Real quick, let me tell you guys about next week. We're going to be having another very crucial discussion next week. I am going to be talking to Miss Mandy Ernst from the American Cancer Society. We really want to have Mandy on because Mandy's a rock star. Obviously, she's doing things that are very important to try to benefit folks who need help. But also, cancer in general is just something that has touched everyone's life. We all know someone who has battled cancer. Most of us have close family members or friends, and some of you listening have battled cancer yourself. So it's going to be a very, very important discussion. I'm going to be asking Mandy some tough questions, things such as, how do we know where the money's going once we donate to the American Cancer Society? But we're also going to be talking about all the different services that they offer and the resources that are available to people who are battling cancer and their families. So make sure you tune in. And now, for our sponsors for this week. We've got House to Home Realty in Southern Illinois. I can't say enough good things about Miss Celia Robertson, who owns that company. Celia is a mogul. Celia is a go-getter, but she's also a person with a very big heart and a very, very brilliant woman. I have a lot of respect for her. She is working alongside Toby and me to try to help veterans in this area. But she also has a company that's making a lot of people very happy. So if you need to sell your home or you need to buy your next home, contact House to Home Realty in Southern Illinois. Again, that is owned by our friend, Miss Celia Robertson. And make sure you tell them that you heard about House to Home on this podcast. And last, but certainly never least, Metropolis Music and Media, the man behind the controls, the man making this podcast look and sound so good every week, Mr. Toby Glass. Toby is the man with the plan. If you have any media needs whatsoever, you want to contact Toby at Metropolis Music and Media. Now, guys, I might not be a rock star. I might not be a state representative. I may not be the man with the plan like Toby or the mogul like Celia, but I get to live a blessed life And all of you are a huge reason for that. I appreciate you, and I thank you for tuning in every week. And even though I'm not a rock star, because of you guys, I get to live a very rock and roll life. I'll see you guys next week.